4 murders and 2 attempted murders left a sleepy English village stunned. One of Great Britain's earliest recorded serial killers was lurking.
On the prowl.
Not only would the murderer be revealed to be a woman, but even worse than that for 17th century England was that she didn't believe in God. You certainly didn't want to get on the wrong side of Elizabeth Ridgeway, Britain's first recorded serial poisoner. Welcome to Crimes from History. We'll begin in the year 1653. So what was going on back then? Well, England was emerging from years of civil war and had recently executed monarch Charles I.
His execution sounded like this. Blip, 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 blip. Now I'm making light of an execution, but this was a dickhead king, ladies and gentlemen. He caused so many people to die.
After this, Puritan and head of the Fun Police Oliver Cromwell began his 5-year stint as Lord Protector of the new Republican Commonwealth of Great Britain. Over in Sweden, the Dong of Europe, sorry Sweden, they were having bother with their royals too. Brainiac Queen Christina was on the throne and up to all manner of shenanigans that would piss the country off, such as refusing to marry, being too financially extravagant, and converting to Catholicism. The peasants turned against her and set out to create their own peasant kingdom. That's not me being flippant or a section of Disneyland, that's actually what they called it. Peasants were also revolting in Switzerland over taxation.
Oh, there you go, bringing class into it again.
That's what it's all about.
But they soon fell into line after being captured, tortured, and their leaders executed. What they like. New Amsterdam, later named New York City, was incorporated, and over in India, the beautiful Taj Mahal was completed.
Man who builds a mausoleum for his dead wife. So heartbroken is he?
Guilty. He obviously did something bad when she was alive. That's like, giving someone flowers, isn't it?
You'd never thought, I'll just give Suzanne some flowers.
No, because she'd be going, oh, aye, what's been going on? If I built her that, she'd be going, what's been going on?
But back in Blighty, the husband's family was celebrating the birth of a daughter they named Elizabeth at their farm just outside Ibstock in Leicestershire. Unusually for the period, Elizabeth remained unwed and living with her parents until she was 29. Also unusually for the period was Elizabeth's seeming indifference for the Presbyterian religion she was born into, or indeed any other religion. When the family departed for church each Sunday, Elizabeth would often refuse to go, causing a number of heated arguments between herself and her mother. But this wasn't exceptional. Elizabeth and her mother would regularly argue, whether it was about church, a lack of marriage proposals, housework, anything and everything. Their disagreements only ending when Mrs. Husbands fell ill and died suddenly in the late 1670s. Though the death was mysterious, it was the 17th century after all, and sudden deaths were 10 a penny. There was certainly no reason to think the farmer's wife had been, say, murdered by her daughter.
Who said that?
A year later, Elizabeth moved out of the family home after securing employment as a household servant in the nearby town of Ibstock. At her new place of work, she could be quite difficult and abrupt, but it was also stated that she would flirt outrageously with her male counterparts.
Hi. Hi, do you know what time we finished tonight?
I don't know, about 10ish, I think.
10, eh?
Elizabeth went from being a lowly spinster living with her father and doing manual labour day in and day out on a farm in the middle of nowhere to having a cushy housekeeper's position in a well-to-do residence in bustling Ibstock. Okay, it's not exactly New York City, or New Amsterdam rather, but would have felt like it compared to the small farm setting she had come from. She was a relatively carefree, independent woman now, well, as independent and carefree as women could be in the 1600s. There's no evidence that Elizabeth was doing anything more than having a bit of harmless, flirty conversation with the men she chatted to, but one of her male colleagues was about to throw a spanner in the works.
Can I get you tea or coffee, darling?
That's a lovely pair of jugs.
Oh, cheeky. Just keep your hands off them, they're hot.
Tell me something I don't know.
Do you want to rub them on my
Asquith!
He didn't like her behaviour and made his opinion known to Elizabeth, who didn't take kindly to his judgments. The grudge between them grew until he threatened to tell the master of the house of Elizabeth's inappropriate relations with numerous suitors. Again, there was very likely nothing going on other than some light banter.
Mad Bants? I'm the Archbishop of Banterbury. You're the Bantam of the Opera. I don't get it. Whoosh. Oh, Bantam-Beck. Someone needs tickets to the Bantamime. Eric Bantana.
But this fella did not realise with whom he trifled, and days after his threat to snitch to their employer, he got dead. Oh, that's just weird. He died. Although there was absolutely no suspicion at the time, it won't come as a shock to you intelligent folk listening that Elizabeth had a hand in her co-workers and, spoiler alert, her mother's demise. She had poisoned them using a substance called white mercury, not that heavy silver liquid mercury I used to stick my fingers in during chemistry at school.
What a heavy price to pay for popularity.
White mercury is a powder, and a highly toxic powder at that, which causes an agonising death, sometimes over a number of days. Elizabeth would mix it with broth and serve that to her victims. The corrosive white mercury would get to work burning the esophagus, stomach, everything it touched. Now, you may be thinking, how on earth did she manage to poison 2 people so far who would have been writhing in agony without raising suspicion? Well, back then, you would have to travel miles, sometimes to the nearest city, to see a doctor. It was very unlikely that a small town in a rural community like Ibstock would have a doctor at all, let alone a doctor who could identify the very rare occurrence of white mercury poisoning. This is a time where a burst appendix would regularly kill someone, and crossover symptoms could mean an easy misdiagnosis. Most times, after a few days, an ill person would simply recover from a stomach bug or whatever was wrong with them. If Elizabeth had used a lot of the white mercury, the person may well be dead within a few hours, by which time they would have a quick funeral and be buried in the local graveyard, no suspicions raised, no questions asked. Okay, if a lot of people were dropping like flies, or somebody was very obviously committing murder, it would be investigated, but most of the time, people just died. Young, old, ill for a day, ill for a while, quietly, screaming in agony. Death happens and was accepted with fewer questions then than it is now. And as sad as it is to say, Elizabeth's mother and co-worker weren't important enough to have anything near as scientific and groundbreaking as an autopsy. It just didn't happen. And besides, nobody was suspicious of their deaths, so life moved on. At the ripe old age of 30, it was time for Elizabeth to consider marriage. Heck, she was positively geriatric by 17th century standards. She'd finally narrowed her many suitors down to one John King, a servant from another household whom she believed would be good husband material. But what's that coming over the hill? It's a Mr. Thomas Ridgeway. He was the local tailor, so you know he had that Ibstock drip. And was well-to-do, or well enough to do for Elizabeth, who wasted no time putting her well-honed flirting technique to the test.
What are you doing? What are you doing?
In no time at all, she'd managed to woo Thomas. She realised she'd made a big mistake in promising herself to John King now that she'd met this agreeable tailor who soon wanted her hand in marriage. So what to do? Well, she could have an honest conversation with King, tell him she'd had second thoughts and let him move on with his life, or she could crack open the old white mercury and kill him for some reason, which is what she did. The latter, not the former. As with Elizabeth's previous victims, after his death, John King, being nothing more than a household servant, didn't receive an inquest or autopsy. However, King's death began to raise suspicions of those surrounding Thomas Ridgeway, her remaining suitor. Despite the whirling rumours of foul play, the two lovebirds, Elizabeth and Thomas, continued their courtship through the winter months. They married the 1st of February 1683, but the newlyweds' joy was short-lived when Thomas's sister called in a long-standing debt of £20, a little over £5,000 in today's currency, that before their nuptials Elizabeth had known nothing of. The pair was left destitute. Elizabeth was crushed. The near bankruptcy of her new life left her feeling trapped, as she'd chosen Thomas for his means and not necessarily his personality. Her visions of being the wife of a fancy tailor with splendid pantaloons and fabulous, feather boas or whatever, had dissolved. So what does Elizabeth do to escape her unhappy circumstances? I think you can guess. One Sunday morning after 3 weeks, yes, just 3 weeks of marriage, Thomas set off for church, leaving Elizabeth at home preparing a hearty broth. More like a heart-stopping broth. On his return, Thomas ate his meal and remarked to his 2 teenage apprentices, William Corbett and Richard Tilley, that the broth was gritty and rather unpleasant. But being the doting husband he was, Thomas ate most of the soup, laced with Elizabeth's spice of choice.
Let me add a little bit of spice to that.
Without mentioning anything to her.
Your soup's shit, love.
Within 2 days, Thomas Ridgway would fall ill and die, becoming Elizabeth's 4th fatality. After the town heard of Thomas's death, rumours began to swirl surrounding the newly wedded and now newly widowed Elizabeth's involvement. She had flown too close to the sun and was about to be burned, for Thomas was no servant nor farmer's wife who could be rid of so easily. He was a popular businessman with employees and a respected family. The townspeople were divided. There was no physical proof that she'd killed her husband, so nothing more could be done, right? Wrong. 2 of the suspicious townsfolk were Thomas's teenage apprentices, William Corbett and Richard Tilley, to whom Thomas had complained that his broth was gritty. Getting wind of their dislike for her, Elizabeth served the apprentices a bowl of soup. "Nope," said the pair, who absolutely refused to eat it. Elizabeth's response was to fake anger and throw out the uneaten broth.
How dare you? How dare you?
Upon seeing this, Richard recalled that Elizabeth had also promptly thrown out the uneaten soup of her husband just days prior. Why, it was almost like she was destroying evidence. With all the pieces falling into place, the terrified young apprentices reported their suspicions to the local Justice of the Peace, a man called Sir Beaumont Dixie, the 2nd Baronet of Market Bosworth. I can't find a picture of him, but I suspect he looked something like this. Elizabeth Ridgway was detained on suspicion of murder, and an inquest into her husband's sudden and mysterious death was ordered. 8 days after his demise, Thomas's remains were exhumed for examination. As part of the inquest, Elizabeth was forced to perform a ritual called cruentation, a method that began in the Middle Ages, so you know it's going to be super scientific. The common belief was that the body of the victim would spontaneously bleed if touched by their murderer. What a load of old shit. And Elizabeth objected, but at the graveside, her father pushed her onto Thomas's corpse in order to get her to comply. Now, 8 days in, the body would have been, let's say, squishy, so any pressure would cause it to leak. Oh, sorry, this is so gross.
I'm okay.
Which is what it did, and when she fell, blood burst from Thomas's nose and mouth. The coroner confirmed that Thomas had been poisoned based on the reaction of the corpse. Elizabeth was jailed in Leicester and found guilty of 4 murders plus the 2 attempted murders of the apprentices. She was sentenced to the standard 17th century punishment for women, being burned alive, at which point she decided to confess. She admitted to buying poison from a woman at a local market, but protested that a demon had told her to poison anyone who offends her. It was obviously bullshit, but it's worth a try, I suppose. She said that because of the demon's orders, she always kept a fresh stock of poison hidden in her hair. In her hair? Who is she, Amy Winehouse? She Patsy Stone? When that excuse didn't work, Elizabeth insisted that the poison was meant for her so she could take her own life, but they were having none of it, and clergyman John Newton was tasked with counselling Elizabeth in hopes of helping her make peace with God before her execution. Of course, she had no interest in this and was content remaining a godless woman right up until her death. On March the 24th, 1684, Elizabeth was taken to the place of execution. She was described as being uncooperative. No shit, she was uncooperative. 2 brothers were due to be hanged for robbery before Elizabeth's execution, but one was offered the choice of being set free, only if he acted as executioner to his brother and randomly Elizabeth.
What the fuck? Why?
He refused, which was very noble, and we don't even know his name. This is always such a problem when I do research, because I understand why they executed people back then. They thought it was a deterrent, that it would serve as a warning to others not to commit crime, etc, etc. But the horrific methods they use overshadow and steal attention from the criminals' acts and the victims of their crimes. Also, they'd execute someone for stealing a sheep or defacing a monument in the same way they'd kill a serial murderer like Elizabeth. It's so disproportionate and histrionic. I'd love to say 400 years later that we've moved on, but humans are disappointing. Well, that was fun. Got a bit dark at the end, as usual, but c'est la vie, or c'est la mort, as French executioners say, probably. Anyway, that's it for now. Let me know if you enjoyed this one, and thanks for watching. Sweet dreams.